today I'm joined by Brian Kelley. Thanks for joining me to talk a little bit about archiving and all the preservation work that you're doing as a part of our History of Gear series that we've been doing recently. So thanks for joining.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
We'll put a timestamp on this. Right now, going through the COVID crisis, and you're in New York right now. How are you holding up? How are things your way, and kind of what's your situation right now?
Everything's pretty good right now. I'm in upstate New York. I'm located in a small town, probably about 2.5 hours outside of New York. So for me, it's kind of the same, just having to take extra precautions when going to the grocery store or not having friends over and just spending more time in nature now. But definitely glad I'm not in New York City right at the moment.
Right. Well, glad to hear that you're doing well and safe right now, especially. I didn't mention a couple of your titles right off the bat. Professional photographer, archivist, author. Anything I missed?
That's it right now.
Historian.
Hopefully more in the future.
Yeah. Well, you're working on a lot of projects, and all of them are really interesting. So we'll see how much we can pack in a short amount of time. But maybe let's start with kind of your professional career. Do you mind sharing a little bit about what you do professionally, and kind of how we'll get into how that's influenced some of these projects that you're working on?
Yeah. I'm a professional photographer, and from photography kind of stemmed archiving, which has now been it's kind of transformed into more of like a profession. From the archive projects that I've been able to do, I've been able to get 2 published books. New York City Transit Authority archive, which was over like almost 150 years of New York City transit ephemera. And then also more recently in the last year, Parks, which is the last 100 years of national park maps and brochures.
Yeah, let's get into that project right off the bat. So working professionally, doing what type of photography mostly? Well, commercial photography.
So when I first started doing photography, I aligned it with my passion at the time, which was skateboarding. So for the first 10 years, it was just like shooting skateboarding. I worked with this brand called Huff out of LA, and I did all of their lookbooks and still life photography. And then from that kind of got me more and more into still life photography. And that kind of became the main focus over the last 8 years, was just doing still life work for companies like Nike, Adidas, Vans, Huff, and a couple others. And then, on the side, you're always looking for personal projects, because doing commercial work can only excite you so much. And that was really what got me into all of a sudden looking more into New York City Transit. I lived in Brooklyn for the last 13 years, and riding the subway almost every day, I started to notice different Metro cards and the changing of the maps, something that you only really see over time. So then I just started collecting those, doing flat lays, and then being able to have these grids of, hundreds of different types of Metro cards, and then kept pushing that. And then eventually, had almost 3,000 pieces of New York City Transit ephemera, and then showed the guys over at Standards Manual that, and they were like, let's do a book of it. They already had a relationship with New York City Transit. So we got the A-OK from them to be able to use anything that was licensed officially through them. And then a couple of years later, we got into Parks.
Well, so the New York Transit started first. How do you even start to get into something like this? You start as a collector, right? Just because you're interested in it. Did you ever think that it would turn into something that would be a part of your career, or something that?
No, not at all. I think I also got into it at a really interesting time within social media. I got the New York City Transit Authority Instagram that I run. It was probably only a year to 2 years into Instagram really kicking off. so like it was the first time I think like you're able to have these like collections to be able to show them digitally, and especially all in one place. Um, so it was a unique opportunity to like be able to like, you know, show especially people that are like born and raised in New York or live in New York and that like love or hate the transit authority. It's part of their lives every day. So like when you can show someone like like a subway ticket from 1930, they get kind of psyched on it. So once the collection was growing and it got to a point where we had like thousands of pieces, you know, yeah, I don't know. It was a hard, like, I don't know where it became like going from just like a hobby to an obsession.
Mm-hmm.
Which is always like a fine line with collecting or like starting archives. Is like what like you have to be very clear on like what it is that you're collecting, because
Right.
it can get it can go so far, like it can get so wide. You know, even with parks, that was something I had to like do pretty early on, was like, what exactly do I want to do with the national parks? And then it was like just the maps.
It's something that our archive is kind of going through right now at the university. We've talked about it previously, the outdoor recreation archive. It's what's the scope of the project? Because if you just say
Mm-hmm.
outdoor recreation,
Super
that could be
super
everything,
vague.
right? So I think we're kind of going through
Yeah.
that right now, trying to figure out what does that include, what does it not include. We're kind of on the fence. Does that include kind of the hook and bullet side of the
Mm-hmm.
industry or not? You know, hunt and fish, or you know, or is it purely the mountaineering, climbing, hiking, camping crowd and brands? So you know, that scope is really important because yeah, if you
Yep.
don't have limits, you could fill up that whole studio with items, right?
That's what happened with New York City Transit. I didn't have the clear vision at the time. So it was like I was getting subway employee uniforms, I was getting brochures, old subway like car pieces of metal that were salvaged off of like a subway car, old signs, the tokens. You know, it would have been different if I just focused on like New York City subway brochures or just city tickets.
Right. Yeah.
But it was super broad, and I learned my lesson from that. And
Yeah.
then that's when I got more focused in on just one thing with parks.
How did you start finding items from, you know, New York Transit Authority? Where were a lot of these items coming from at the time?
Well, when I first started, let's see, I was shit. I might have only been like 22 at the time. So I just like I was so broke and like wasn't able to buy much. So it's just like going around the New York City subway stations and like finding Metro cards and finding old maps that like were like basically people could like stuff things behind the ticket dispensing machines. So you would just find this like, you know, holy grail of like 100 tickets that people had been stuffing in there throughout the years and nobody was cleaning. And that was really early on. And then as soon as I started the NYCTA project, the Instagram, people actually ended up hitting me up and they would send me things.
Hmm.
So I would get things in the mail from people that they were just like, oh, I love what you're doing. Like my grandpa had this in his drawer, whatever, you know. Um, Subway employees used to hit me up and be like, yo, like this is sick. Like, let me know if I can send you a patch, because like every bus terminal has a patch that like is their logo, and it's hard to get them. And people would send me those. And then eventually I got into eBay. And then that was when I got in
And then that
trouble.
was game
'Cause
over. Then that's where all the money
yeah,
went. Yeah.
yeah, all the money I was making commercially through photography was going into that.
So I talked with a collector of vintage backpacks on a
Mm-hmm.
previous episode, and he said as soon as he discovered eBay, that you know that's when it was game over. But I asked him the question I'm going to ask you is how many alerts do you have on eBay for items that you're looking for?
I don't have alerts set
Oh, you
up
don't? Wow.
because I don't want to know.
That's probably
I,
smart.
I already look at eBay, like in all honesty, like every day.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's just like real quick. Because I mean, nowadays, like, because I know like all my keywords that I need to
Mm-hmm.
look for, and then I can just like look at it quick. Like right before I go to bed, I'll just look for like national park brochures, national
Right.
monument brochures, whatever. And then you can just sort by newly listed. And if there's nothing new, then I know what's up.
Right. Right.
So just kind of been on top of it.
Yeah, no, that's great. When did you start to, you developed this interest, right? For a lot of what you have in the collection is seemingly insignificant things, right? Most people, like you say, it's a ticket
Mm-hmm.
stub, right?
Yeah.
You buy it, you throw it away. You started to see the value or the beauty in these items, especially like in the larger scheme, right? Like when you
Mm-hmm.
put them all together, that's where you really start to see the beauty. Like there's beauty in them individually, but together it's there's another level.
Yeah.
Um, when did you start to see your work not just as a hobby, but something even bigger than yourself? Like, oh, I'm an archivist. Like I'm helping preserve the world around me for others to appreciate.
Yeah. I mean, I think with New York City Transit Authority or the New York City Transit Project, it kind of took a whole different life when I actually went to, so in New York, they actually have the New York City Transit Museum.
Hmm.
And then I went to the museum and I'm like, I think I have a lot more stuff than they do.
Wow.
And I've actually been hit up from them for certain pieces. And I think that was when I started to see a little bit more value. And then like, like I said, like once you start getting more, like it's probably similar like with your guys' archive right now. It's like once you like have like over 500 maps and you like really lay it out, it has more of like the wow factor of like, whoa, like this is actually a collection. And I think that's like, I think once you hit that point within anything you're collecting, it just becomes so much more impressive. I guess you could kind of say that like, it's like, even with like the tree stuff,
Mm-hmm.
it's like you show a photo of a tree, but then you show a whole collection of a tree, or it's like you have like a photo of a tree, but then you like put someone next to it and you can see the scale.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, that's a really big tree. But it's like kind of the same with like these maps or like any sort of collection where like you get to see like, yeah, like the size of it.
Right. It's like it's these objects, events, people in the larger context, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's when things become really interesting.
Yeah.
I need to attribute, a lot of the work that we're doing with the Outdoor Recreation Archive to you. I want to dive into this quite a bit.
Yeah.
But making archives accessible to people. We had the archive; it was up and running. These materials are being preserved at the university in temperature and controlled environments by professionals, so they're going to last a long time, generations. Right? Paper's been around a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and so we're planning on these catalogs and materials being around for years to come. There's a website where you can see the scanned covers.
Mm-hmm.
In a pretty accessible format, but there's something about what you were doing where you were taking, I first became acquainted with the National Parks Project,
Mm-hmm.
and how you were just taking simple, flat lays of these materials and just putting them on Instagram, just a simple image. But for some reason, that one image is really striking. And then you look at
Mm-hmm.
your feed and you see them all lined up in a grid. And kind of like you said, it becomes really impressive to see that collection.
Mm-hmm.
How important was it for you to make materials accessible for people? Because
Um,
you can, materials are available in museums.
mm-hmm.
Lots of archives have digital exhibits online, but for some reason, putting them on Instagram seems to break down a barrier that exists.
I mean, I think the biggest thing right now is, we're looking at our phones more than our computers, especially right now. We're not People are spending more time just like in their own space. Um, and for me, with my still life background, like the the person I had that I did like an apprenticeship under for still life photography, he was like such like this like anal uh organized person where like everything was had to be like precise and clean. And that kind of like broke off onto me where like I took that same initiative with this project. So like right from the start, I needed to find like a consistency, you know? And so I just found that having like a perfectly clean white background with like a little bit of a drop shadow was like not only the easiest thing to recreate time and time again, but it also just kind of looked the best. You know, I wasn't trying to do creative photography. It was just like not trying to take anything away from these pieces themselves. And then putting it on Instagram. And like, I think just like you said, it's like you get like 5, 6 photos on Instagram, you get 10, all of a sudden you've like reached like 20, 30 posts on Instagram. And you're like, whoa, like, all right, it's like starting to feel like an archive. And I think with the NYCTA project, it was like within the first couple of months, because basically I had the archive, I just didn't have a place to put it. So once I put it on Instagram, it definitely took a life of its own, and I don't know, just kind of became like a whole nother beast.
Right. Well, let's get into kind of another project. You've got so many, and they're all really interesting and really important. I want to get into how you juggle them and work on all of them. But how did you get into the national parks maps? When did that start? And yeah, maybe get into that. When did you start recognizing those maps and start collecting them?
It was about 6 months to a year after we had first published New York City Transit Authority Objects, the first book that I'd done with Standards Manual. And I had met up with one of the publishers, you know, 6 months after that book had come out. And we were just like talking about next ideas. He's like, do you have anything? And, you know, that was like when I first got into Smokey the Bear. So he was like, oh, like that's interesting. Like, you know, go down the rabbit hole of eBay and see what you can dig up the same way you did with New York City Transit Authority. And I did. And then I ran into the same problems that I had explained to you earlier with like licensing issues. I went into the national parks. I was going into it with the idea of it already becoming a book. You know, like I've had the track record with the New York City Transit Authority project, and the guys at Standards Manuals were like, what else you got? Like, let's do something else. So, you know, I wanted to find an agency like the Department of Interior and National Park Service, which is public domain. So that way, you know, I can print anything that doesn't have the new Arrowhead logo. You can actually print for no licensing. So it was like 6 months to like 8 months after, and then I just went on eBay, and took me a little bit to find like what the keywords were to like start finding and digging up a lot of these maps. And then the first one that I saw that was just like, you know, super like clean Swiss style design that everybody loves. It was like it was 1966 or 67 Grand Canyon National Park map. And I saw it and immediately just like took a screenshot, sent it to one of the publishers, and I was like, I think there's more of this. And he's like, all right, keep going. And probably about 400 maps, and then showed them that collection. And then they're like, okay, we're doing a book. And then I like went deeper probably for like another 4 months. And at that point I had close to like 600 maps, because then I just was able to like get more selective with what I was looking for. I actually have lost count now how many maps I have, but yeah, it's up there for sure. Wow. Yeah. And that was like the initial start to parks. But again, I think when I got into it, I didn't know how deep I was going to go. You know, I didn't know the history of the national parks that well. So it was through finding all these maps that I actually discovered a lot more of the national parks. Right. You know, from the founding of the Department of the Interior, which the Department of Interior managed certain parks up until 1916, when the actual National Park Service was founded. And then since then, the development of the national parks. So really, the project maps just from 1916 to present. I think there might be like one or two things that were prior 1916,
this ended up being published as a book, and that might have actually been how I came across you, as I saw the Parks book and started digging into who did this, like who came up with this. This is beautiful, like incredible work. And I think I had archiving on the brain, and so it really jumped out to me. What was the response to the book?
I mean, it was awesome. We first announced the book, and then announced with the announcement, we put pre-sales, and then within the first, I think in under a month, we completely sold out of 5,000 copies.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
great.
I mean, it was like, and we already did a second printing, I think of like, can't remember the amount, but yeah, so it's already gone on second edition.
That's great. Did you ever think that you would be an author of a book? I guess looking
No,
back at the start of your career, like how could you have known? Is that was never an aspiration, or?
no, I mean, if anything, it would have been maybe like a photo book, of like skateboarding photos at the time that I was doing more of, not national park maps. I when I first got into photography, archiving was not something I was thinking about at all.
Right.
And now it's like all I do.
Right.
Luckily, but again, like I don't know if what I'm doing would have as much of a voice if it weren't for Instagram.
It's interesting. Like archives are valuable, in and of themselves, because they preserve, artifacts from the past, so people can go back and refer to them. Right. But we mentioned it a little earlier, but if they're not accessible to people, then what good are they, in a way, right? If they're
Yeah,
not where people are and
yeah,
accessible to people, then kind of what's the point? And that's where we found a lot of value out of Instagram, is that's just where people's eyeballs are, kind of like you mentioned. And down the road there'll be something else, and you and I will probably have to migrate some of our archives to wherever people are looking, and their attention is. So
well, that's
that's
actually the
that.
beauty with the books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
you know
timeless.
is it's timeless in that point. It's also like it's a form of um like just giving it more like a tactile life.
Right.
Like these are already printed objects that we made digital, and then we were like, it's almost like returning the favor back
Yeah.
into this printed form that people can appreciate.
Right. Yeah. Well, you're really taking all these disparate things, right, that have been spread all over, and you're consolidating them. You're bringing them back together in a form where people, they don't have to go through all the effort that you went through to search it out. You're doing everyone a
No.
favor. So,
Yeah.
um, can you talk through kind of the format of the book a little bit too? Was it a focus on the covers themselves, inside, kind of a mix? Like what's kind of
Yeah.
the focus of the book itself?
The focus of the book is definitely the covers.
Mm-hmm.
Most of, I guess you would want to like say like the um artistic style, it's really featured on the covers, because that's, of course, it's like what the person first sees, so that's how you're going to like bring them in. um and then it eventually, I would love to do another one that would show more of the insides, because there are a lot of insides of the book that are beautiful. But I think for consistency purposes with our first one, Parks, we just wanted to focus on just the covers and tell the story of that history of the development within technology that designers were um, accessible to, having access to be able to like, I mean, like, think about like a computer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for how long were they making these without computers? Um, I mean, like some of my favorites, and I've talked about it before in other times, but like uh, the first brochures and maps in 1916 are like some of my favorites, because like the photos are just so beautiful. So like one thing I always look at is with these maps is you actually have like what I like to, you know, call like a timeline of appreciation and I'm trying to think of the right word, where like basically like someone cares to make something beautiful.
Yeah.
And I look at like the ones from 1916 till probably like the 30s, And they were like these beautiful black and white photographs, you know, super romanticized Ansel Adams things. And then eventually, like, I think like there was this like whatever development within design, but it wasn't good yet. So it's just like this like period of like aesthetically, like to me at least, bad design up until the late 50s. And then from the late 50s to like 1989, 90, it was like back to like amazing design. And now, you know, and like nowadays, like there's just like it's called the unigrid system. That's what it's like. That's the design that Massimo Benelli's team came up with, the same people that did New York City Transit Authority's design. And for them, they were just trying to figure out how to make design that was uniform across all of the national parks, as well as cut down on cost of production. Design companies and all the maps were all over the place. There was no system in place, so like the cost of printing was like super high. So then they developed this, which is the Unigrid from it's like 88 or 89 to present of what they use as far as just a way to keep it all uniform. Which is, I totally understand that, but it's also like so sad.
Right.
There's no like real creative freedom, you know.
And you know, that is interesting because you have all the pieces, right? You can step back and look at this progression of design over time. That's you know, one of the pieces that's so important about all of this work is being able to step back and look at it as a whole. Do you think that everyone can be an archivist or a historian?
Yeah, I mean, it all is, you know, your situation financially, but I think an archive, like whether it's you going to the store and collecting pasta boxes that you're buying, you know, it could be. I know that there's people there's an archive on Instagram that I love. It's fruit stickers. It's stickers that come on fruit, and it's like so good because all it is like somebody just puts on a white piece of paper and takes a photo of it and puts it online.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, these archives of what you want to create, it's all dependent on what you want to do and how far you want to push it, you know.
Right. It seems like from my perspective, there's the New York Transit Authority, right? But you had more of a collection, right? Like, I guess the point is, you know, some of these institutions have like limited bandwidth, right? And there's so many topics and so many items and so many things that can be collected. There's not enough institutions to do it, right? So
yeah,
there's kind of a need for people like you know, people like me to go out and do this work on our own, right? There's just too much to do, right? And everyone has their own area of interest that's, you know, this niche area that only they can do, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, yeah, anyone can do it. And I think though, if you're able to like take the initiative to like just start something, it can potentially develop into, I mean, you know, hopefully one day that I can like donate my archive to a university or something, you know, because I can only do so much with it / preserve it for my lifetime. But yeah, I mean, it also depends on how far you want to take it. You know, it can be something that you become obsessed with, or it can just be a hobby.
Right.
You know, I've gone the extreme similar to you, but you know, you can have it be whatever you want.
Right. I think that's great. And I think that gives people options, right? You don't have to go all in and be the extremist and spend all your money and check eBay every day. But it you know, I think
I
the
don't
important
recommend
thing, you know, with that, I think what's really interesting about your work is both preserving the past, you know, in these physical objects, but you're also preserving the natural world in a really interesting way through the Champion Trees project. Do you mind sharing a little bit about what that project is, how that came together?
Yeah. So the Champion Tree project started late 2016, kind of. That was like the birth of it, I guess. I had just done a cross country trip with one of my friends, and growing up on the East Coast, I never had seen big trees, and went out west and was up in the Olympic Peninsula and saw old growth forest for the first time. And then after that trip, I was hooked on it. And during that trip, I had just finished up this book that was really inspiring called The Golden Spruce. And coming back home, just again, kind of with my personality of similar with the archiving, I just was like every night just on Google looking up things, and eventually found out about Champion Trees. And I found out about American Forests, which is the nonprofit that has been keeping this record of champion trees since 1940. A little background, like a champion tree is nominated as the largest of its species through a point system. So you measure the height of the tree, the circumference at breast height, and then also the crown spread, its longest branches, east to west, north to south, and divide that by 4. And anyways, that gives you a point. And that point is then compared to other people that have nominated similar species. And then you battle it out, and then you get a champion tree. So like, I think currently there's close to 800 champion trees in the United States, spread all across. And so I'd spent the last 2.5 years kind of working with American Forest, traveling around the country and documenting these champion trees for their archive. Because for me, I'd stumbled upon their website and was like, wow, you guys have so much information, there's so much data. But similar to what we were just talking about, if somebody really being able to invest time and their personal skill into something like this is a huge investment. So there was no way for them to have all these trees professionally shot, which to me, that was so sad, because like you have these trees that are like 600 years old, and you got a cell phone photo that's representing them. And I thought that was just like, oh my gosh, like this is insane. So I hit them up, and then I was able to get the project privately funded. And so for 2.5 years, I just lived part-time out of my van and photographed champion trees.
How many trees during that trip, or in total, I guess?
So far I've been able to get close to 122 trees.
Wow.
And now in the last little bit now, I've been able to try to refocus, my efforts that I'm doing, because I go to these areas to photograph the champion trees. Like for instance, when I was up in Logan, I went and photographed the Rocky Mountain juniper, the Jardine juniper, which everybody in Logan probably knows about. Mm-hmm. I was, I'm walking through these forests that are like somewhat ancient, or like there's other huge trees in the area, or you get to an area and it's like beautiful landscape. And, my main focus was just that one tree though, and not the forest. And I thought, man, that's so silly. Like I'm traveling around the country going to like all these beautiful places, and I'm not taking advantage of it. So in the last 6 months, I've really switched gears a little bit, and I just founded the Gathering Growth Foundation. So Gathering Growth Foundation works to visually preserve these trees' legacies, trees and forests. So we're looking to create this visual library or visual archive and educational platform where people can come and learn about all these trees.
That's amazing.
So
yeah.
Focusing past just champions.
I think that's interesting, because it goes back to, kind of your archival work with the New York Transit Authority, right? It's like, you could overlook these small things like the tickets, mm-hmm. and maybe look for, mm-hmm. I don't know what the champion tree of the New York Transit Authority would be, right? But you could look for one object, right? That's like mm-hmm. considered the most valuable, and forget all the little things. Kind of same thing with the forest in general, right? Like obviously mm-hmm. champion trees, incredible, right? Deserve to be documented, but you can be missing out on the larger forest, right? As you're walking to, kind of like you said.
Yeah. And, something that, when I first got into this project, it was just like, oh, like the big trees, that was all I was interested in. And I just didn't understand what an old growth forest was, or like what is considered an old tree. You know, when you think old trees, you're like big trees, but you could have basically you can get like stunted growth trees that just have poor soil conditions, but could be hundreds of years old, thousands of years old, but just small. And I thought that's amazing too. Like, and you know, that's the biggest thing is like I'm pretty devoted and into this world now of like forestry and big trees and studying this, but like there's so much to learn that how can I like visually get people excited about trees, just to like take an extra 10 seconds of consideration when they're walking on the street looking at a tree.
Is that your main goal through the foundation? Is that what you want people to take away?
Yeah, I think I want somebody to be able to learn, you know, not to step on roots. I want people to understand how sensitive a tree is. I mean, they're pretty resilient, but like, you know, if you had a tree in New York City or in downtown Logan, and people were walking constantly around the base of it, if it was like a park, right? I have one of the best examples is a friend of mine he's a arborist, and there was a park in Southern Oregon that he got called in to evaluate because all the trees were dying. And he gets there and he's like, well, yeah, look at the bottom of the trees. And basically all of the soil around the bottoms of the trees, the soil was compacted. So it was basically dead soil. And eventually that was impacting the tree and the root system and killing the tree. And so he had like tell this city council to be like, listen, like you have to close this park down for the next like 5 years, because all these trees, the soil needs to like regenerate. And everybody was like, oh my God, that's crazy. Are you serious? Like people love this park. And they're like, oh, do they love the park or do they love the trees? And that just comes from an educational thing. You can't be mad at anybody, but you just have to like try to inform people in like the best way possible about like the mutual respect that you have to have for these things,
right,
in order to enjoy them.
I think what you're doing is amazing, and it kind of goes back to like just taking for granted the world around us, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the common tree that we see every day, or the ticket stub, and some, you know, it's almost too bad that it really takes some, you know, it's good for you, right? Like you need to be able to do this work, but in a
Yeah.
way it's kind of sad that we need someone to like remind us and like put this in perspective for us to appreciate what's around us. But
yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it's rough. It's not an easy task, and just trying to find out ways to get people excited about trees. And that's why, like, you know, initially with the champion tree thing, it's pretty easy because everybody loves a big tree or an old tree. You know, just telling someone that it's a 3,000-year-old tree, it also completely changes their perspective on it.
right.
You know, if you just saw a tree walking on the street, you'd be like, okay. But if I was like, yo, that tree is like 600 years old, you'd be like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's
Which is
that
so
perspective.
cool.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, you could look at it the same. That's kind of what my association was with archives, is when you see an archive big, it would be like if you had somebody come to Utah and like you pulled out the entire outdoor research or art recreation archive.
Yeah. 2,000 catalogs. Yeah.
Yeah. Like somebody would be like, this is incredible.
Right. Yeah. There's some like level there, like you hit a certain number and it gains legitimacy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I this wasn't planned, but this is like the perfect Earth Day conversation, right? Like you could pull out so many lessons or thoughts, right? You know, from a preservation, conservation perspective, like what you're doing to like preserve, you know, archives, print materials, like translate so well to what, you know, there's just a common thread between all of the work that you're doing, and it's archiving, preserving, protecting, to give people greater perspective, right?
Yeah. And, you know, something that, with Gathering Growth Foundation, like something I just have to try to be sensitive to is that like, I'm not a preservation, organization. I'm not doing work like American Forest that's going out actually protecting these trees or putting laws into place or whatever. But the way I look at it is I'm visually preserving.
Right.
And I think that's just like it's a good like jump off point, you know, to get things going, to like get people initially excited about something.
Yeah, totally.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of where we're at as like a mission statement.
Right. Oh, that's great. How do you find the time to balance all these projects? I mean, some you've kind of closed the book on in a way, or turned eBay alerts off, right? So
yeah,
like you, in some ways, some of these projects are, you know, maybe not like currently active, but how do you juggle all these projects? I imagine you've got a couple more that you're looking at down the pipeline as well.
yeah. I mean, you know, luckily between with the Champion Tree project now turning into Gathering Growth, that project is slightly funded through, again, private donors. So between that type of money that I get in, as well as whenever I can make some money off of commercial work, I've been able to get a part-time assistant project manager, and she is amazing. So she just like helps with all the organization that goes into it. You know, I'm basically on eBay and I'm buying these things, and then they get shipped over to the studio in Brooklyn, and then she organizes and catalogs things for me, and then I post. And it's just this like, now it's, I think that was the hardest thing, is now the whole thing between trees, maps, transit, and my personal photography, it's now just becoming like more of like this machine, and it's able to run and not be as like, it's still stressful from time to time, and you know, always trying to find, you know, as any business is, more money. But yeah, now it's running a little smoothly.
Yeah, that's
so
great.
Hopefully I can continue. I mean, that's our biggest thing right now is with Gathering Growth now, we can now actually accept donations through our fiscal sponsor. So now it's able to help with keeping the project going.
Oh, that's awesome. That's
yeah
great.
yeah
Do you don't have to give any of this away, but do you have any other archives that you're looking at right now or gathering at the moment, or are you just kind of focusing entirely on what you've got right now?
I've kind of just been focusing a lot on the tree stuff, Gathering Growth. It's so incredibly dense. You know, this project is probably what I'll be doing for the rest of my life.
Wow.
Yeah. You know, initially when I first started it, when it was just going to be focused on champion trees, I was going to give myself 10 years. And the quick math on it was like, there was like, at the time, there was like 795 champion trees. I was like, oh, okay, like 10 years. So like 10 times 365 days, roughly, like, so 3,650 divided by 795 meant that I had to find a tree every 4.5 days for the next 10 days or 10 years. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to kill myself and not have a relationship if I do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've had to slow down, and to that extent, it's also like, you know, it's a life project.
Yeah.
So, and I just think it's in, you know, similar to like the stuff that you're doing and the maps. It's a part of history, and I just like it to be a consistent body of work too. So probably won't stop. And because of that, other projects might fall off a little bit, but totally okay with that. I think they've had a life of their own enough where like having the 2 books published is pretty satisfying.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. I guess before we kind of wrap up, any other thoughts, anything that we left off or didn't cover that you want to share?
I guess one little promotional piece for you guys is on Friday, Earth Day, or Arbor Day. We will be publishing with Outside Magazine the short film that we just got done finishing making. It's about this big tree hunter. His name's Carl Casey, and it's telling his story of finding the world's largest known pine tree.
Wow.
So pretty excited about that.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll
So
definitely, we'll promote that one for sure and include links to everything in the
yeah,
description so people can find that and definitely promote that.
sweet.
That sounds incredible.
Yeah, it's a pretty crazy story.
No, that
Well,
sounds great. Can't
it's
wait.
as far as tree stuff goes.
Yeah, no, hey, tree stuff is, as we know, and from this conversation, really exciting. Like what you're working
Yeah,
on is amazing.
it is.
Um, how's the best way for, I'm going to include all these in the links, but best ways to stay in touch with
Yeah.
you?
On social media, handle is Brian Kelley Photo. And then for the tree project, it is just at Gathering Growth and gatheringgrowth.com. And then you can also, if you're interested in the national park maps to see that archive, you can go to NPS_maps. And then, or maybe it's just NPS maps, no underscore. Yeah. And then there's the NYCTA project.
I'll link to all those projects so people
Yeah,
can find all that.
please.
But
Awesome.
well, thanks for your time. Thanks for what you've done to influence our archive. Like you've helped take it to the next level visually. And just, all the projects you're working on, so important. And I
Sweet.
appreciate you just taking time to share a little bit about them.
No problem. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, of course.